The massive arena buzzed with excited voices from creatures across the galaxy. Beings with scales, feathers, and metal skin filled the viewing platforms while they waited for the show to begin. Commander Jake Morrison stood in a small metal room beneath the arena floor and checked his gear one more time. His hands moved over his knife, his basic armor, and his water pack with the calm motion of someone who had done this many times before. The door opened and Dr. Lisa Carter walked in. She looked worried, and her face showed the stress she had been carrying for days. Jake had volunteered for what the aliens called a diplomatic test, but everyone knew it was really a fight to the death. The Galactic Council wanted to see if humans were strong enough to join their group of space-traveling species. "Jake, you don't have to do this," Lisa said as she sat down across from him. "We can find another way to prove ourselves to them." Jake looked up from his equipment and smiled. "Doc, we both know this is the only way. They think we're weak because we don't have claws or armor or poison glands. They need to see what humans can really do." Above them, the crowd grew louder as more aliens arrived to watch the human fight. Most of them had never seen a human before, and they were not impressed. Jake looked like a small, soft creature compared to the warriors from other worlds. He had no natural weapons, no thick skin to protect him, and no special powers that the other species could see. Admiral Zexton stood in the center of the main viewing platform and raised his forearms for silence. His voice carried across the arena through speakers built into every surface. "Friends and allies of the Council, today we test the newest species that wants to join our great alliance. The humans from the third planet of the Sol system claim they deserve a place among us." The crowd made sounds that might have been laughter if they came from human throats. Many aliens were already placing bets on how quickly Jake would die. The shortest guess was 30 seconds, and the longest was 3 minutes. Nobody thought the human would last longer than that. "Their world is marked as a Deathworld Class 12, the Admiral continued. "This sounds dangerous, but look at this creature. Where is its armor? Where are its weapons? Where is its strength?" The Admiral's voice carried amusement as he spoke about Jake like he was looking at a pet instead of a warrior. Jake finished checking his gear and stood up. Through the small window in his waiting room, he could see part of the arena floor. It was a huge space with different levels and obstacles designed to test fighters in many ways. Some areas had deep pits while others had high platforms. Metal walls created maze-like passages and open spaces for different types of combat. Lisa stood up too and put her hand on Jake's shoulder. "Remember everything we learned about their fighting styles? Most of these species rely on brute strength or natural advantages. They don't expect tactical thinking or adaptation." Jake nodded. "I know, that's going to be their mistake." The arena. Master's voice boomed through the speakers again. "The human will face 7 challenges. Each one will test different abilities needed for survival in our galaxy. The rules are simple. The human continues until he is dead, knocked out, or wins every challenge." In the crowd, Dr. Carter took her seat in the section reserved for the human diplomatic team. Around her, aliens from dozens of worlds chatted casually about the upcoming entertainment. They spoke about Jake like he was already dead and were discussing which challenge would kill him first. "I give him 40 seconds against the spine render," said a tall creature with crystal skin. "Too long," replied his companion, who looked like a walking tree. "The human has no venom resistance. First bite and it's over." Dr. Carter wanted to tell them they were wrong, but she stayed quiet. Let them underestimate Jake. Let them think humans were weak. They would learn the truth soon enough. Jake walked to the arena entrance where a guard waited to escort him. The guard was twice Jake's size with thick armor covering his entire body. He looked down at Jake with what might have been pity. "Human, are you ready to die for your species?" Ard asked in broken English. Jake looked up at the massive alien and smiled. "I'm ready to win for my species." The guard made a sound that was probably laughter and pressed a button on the wall. The massive doors began to open and bright light flooded into the corridor. The sound of thousands of alien voices hit Jake like a wave as he stepped onto the arena floor. The space was even bigger than it looked from his window. The ceiling stretched up so high he could barely see it, and the floor was covered with different types of terrain. Jake walked to the center circle marked on the ground and waited. Admiral Zexton's voice filled the arena once more. Behold the human specimen. Notice how it moves without confidence. See how small and weak it appears. This creature claims to come from a death world but shows no signs of the strength such an environment should create. Jake stood in the center circle and looked around at the thousands of alien faces watching him. Most showed amusement or curiosity. Some looked bored, as if they were watching something that would be over too quickly to be interesting. None of them looked worried or impressed. The first gate began to open on the far side of the arena. Something moved in the darkness beyond, and Jake could hear the sound of claws scraping against metal. The crowd fell quiet as everyone waited to see what would emerge. Jake took a deep breath and felt his training take over. His heart rate slowed. Instead of speeding up, and his muscles relaxed instead of tensing. This was what he had trained for his entire military career. This was what humans did best. They survived when everything tried to kill them. The creature that emerged from the gate was 12 feet long with a body like a snake but covered in sharp spines. Its head was triangular with eyes that glowed red in the arena lights. Venom dripped from fangs as long as Jake's fingers, and its spine covered. Back rippled with muscle as it moved. The betting pools in the crowd updated their odds. Most aliens were now guessing Jake would die in less than a minute. Jake pulled his knife from its sheath and took his fighting stance. The creature coiled itself like a spring and prepared to strike. The arena master raised his hand and the crowd held its breath. Begin. The spine creature moved faster than anything Jake had ever seen, but his body reacted before his mind could process the attack. Years of combat training kicked in as he rolled to the side just as the massive head struck the spot where he had been standing. The creature's fangs hit the arena floor so hard they sent sparks flying and left deep gouges in the metal surface. Jake came up from his roll with his knife ready and saw his chance. The creature had put all its power into that first strike, and now its head was stuck for just a moment as it pulled its fangs free from the floor. Jake moved in fast and drove his blade between two of the spines on the creature's neck. Right where he guessed the nerve cluster would be, the creature let out a scream that hurt Jake's ears and thrashed wildly to get away from him. Its movements were so violent that one of its own spines snapped under the pressure of its writhing body. The sharp crack echoed through the suddenly quiet arena as the broken spine fell to the floor. Jake backed away and watched the creature carefully. It was hurt but not dead, and now it was angry instead of just hunting. Blood that looked more like green oil leaked from where his knife had cut, and the creature's red eyes focused on him with pure hate. The crowd above had gone completely silent. In the viewing platform, Dr. Carter gripped her chair so hard her knuckles were white. She had known Jake was skilled, but seeing him survive that first attack against something designed to kill had her heart racing. Admiral Zexton leaned forward in his seat, and his mandibles clicked together in what might have been surprise. The human had not only survived the opening attack, but had actually wounded the spine render. This was not going according to any of their predictions. The betting pools throughout the arena began to shift, as aliens who had bet on a quick death started to reconsider their wagers. Some were updating their estimates from seconds to minutes, while others were placing new bets on whether the human might actually survive the first challenge. Jake circled around the wounded creature and studied its movements. The thing was fast, but it moved in predictable patterns like most predators from high-gravity worlds. It relied on overwhelming speed and venom to kill its prey quickly rather than using complex tactics. That was something Jake could work with. The creature struck again, but this time Jake was ready for its speed. He didn't try to match its quickness, but instead used timing and positioning to avoid the attack while staying close enough to counter. Strike. His knife found another gap between spines, and this time he twisted the blade before pulling it free. The creature's second scream was weaker than the first, and more green blood spilled onto the arena floor. It tried to coil around Jake to crush him, but he had already moved away and was circling to its blind side. The thing was powerful, but it was also getting desperate, and desperate predators made mistakes on the third attack. Jake didn't dodge at all. Instead, he dropped flat to the ground as the creature's head passed over him, and then sprang up to grab onto the spines along its back. The creature bucked and twisted to throw him off, but Jake held on and used his position to drive his knife deep into the base of its skull, the spine. Render went limp and crashed to the arena floor with a sound like falling metal. Green blood pooled around its head, and its red eyes slowly dimmed until they looked like cooling coals. Jake stood over the dead creature and pulled his knife free while he caught his breath. The arena stayed quiet for almost 10 seconds before the first alien voice broke the silence. It was a sound of disbelief rather than cheering. The human specimen that was supposed to die in under a minute had just killed one of their combat creatures in less than 2 minutes. Jake wiped his knife clean on the creature's hide and looked around the arena. He could feel thousands of alien eyes watching him, but the atmosphere had changed. Before there had been amusement and casual interest, now there was something else. Not fear exactly, but definitely more respect than they had shown when he first entered. The arena master's voice came through the speakers, but it sounded less confident than before. First challenge complete. Preparing second challenge. A different gate opened and something new emerged into the arena. This creature looked like it was made of living crystal that shifted between solid and transparent as it moved. Jake had read about these things in the briefing files. They could change their physical state to become almost impossible to hit while still being able to attack their enemies. The crowd began to whisper among themselves as they watched the new creature approach. Jake, this challenge was supposed to be even harder than the first one. The crystal being could become like smoke when attacked, but turn solid when it wanted to strike. Most fighters couldn't figure out how to hit something that wasn't really there. Jake watched the creature carefully as it moved toward him. The briefing had said these things had a pattern to their phase shifting, but he would have to figure it out by watching. He had maybe 30 seconds before it got close enough to attack. The creature moved in a strange, flowing way like water running uphill. Every few seconds it would flicker between solid crystal and something that looked like colored air. Jake counted the timing. Solid for 3 seconds, transparent for 2 seconds, solid for 3 seconds, transparent for 2 seconds. The pattern repeated exactly every time. Dr. Carter watched from above as Jake began to move in a pattern that matched the creature's shifting. She realized he was timing his approach to coordinate with the creature's solid phases. The other aliens in the crowd had no idea what the human was planning, but she could see the tactical thinking that made humans so dangerous. The creature reached Jake and immediately tried to strike while in its transparent phase. Its attack passed right through Jake because he had timed his movement to be in the wrong place when the creature was solid enough to hit him. But Jake's counterattack was perfectly timed for when the creature solidified. His knife hit the creature's center mass just as it became solid crystal. The impact sent cracks spreading through its body like a spider web, and the creature let out a sound like breaking glass. It tried to phase back to its transparent state, but the damage made its shifting unstable. Jake pressed his advantage and grabbed the creature while it was still mostly solid. Using its own momentum and his knowledge of physics, he spun around and threw the crystal being as hard as he could against the nearest wall. The impact was devastating. The creature hit the wall while fully solid and shattered into thousands of glittering pieces that scattered across the arena floor. The sound of its destruction was like a mountain of glass breaking all at once. 2 challenges down and Jake was still standing. More than that, he was learning from each fight and getting better at reading his opponents. The crowd was no longer making jokes about quick deaths and easy victories. Admiral Zexton turned to his advisors and spoke in a voice that carried worry instead of amusement. How is this possible? The human shows no signs of fatigue and appears to be adapting to each new challenge. The answer was something the aliens couldn't understand yet, but Dr. Carter knew what they were seeing. They were watching a human do what humans did best: learn, adapt, and turn every challenge into a stepping stone toward victory. Jake had been fighting for 30 minutes, and the arena crowd had changed completely from when he first walked onto the floor. The casual chatter and betting jokes had been replaced by focused attention and worried whispers. Every alien in the viewing platforms was now watching the human with the kind of respect usually reserved for apex predators. The third gate opened with a deep grinding sound and something very different emerged. This creature looked almost like a person, but its skin was pale gray and its eyes were completely black. It moved with careful steps and kept its hands at its sides as it approached Jake. This was a mind hunter, and it killed by projecting pure terror directly into its victim's brain. Jake felt the mental attack hit him like a cold wave washing over his thoughts. Suddenly, his mind was filled with images of everything he had ever feared. He saw his teammates dying in combat, his family being hurt, and himself failing when people depended on him. The fear was so intense that most beings would be paralyzed within seconds, but Jake Morrison had faced real fear before. He had held dying friends while buildings burned around them. He had made life and death decisions when enemy fire was tearing his unit apart. He had looked death in the face more times than he could count and kept fighting anyway. The artificial fear that the creature was pushing into his mind was intense, but it wasn't real. Jake focused on that difference and pushed through the mental assault like walking through heavy rain. His training had taught him that fear was just another enemy that could be defeated with discipline and determination. The creature looked surprised when Jake kept walking toward it instead of falling to the ground in terror. It increased the power of its mental attack, and Jake felt the fear try to crush his thoughts like a heavy weight. But he kept moving forward one step at a time. When Jake got close enough, he struck with his knife at the creature's nerve cluster located just behind its ear. The blade went in clean, and the creature's mental attack stopped immediately as its brain shut down. It fell backward and hit the ground hard enough to crack one of the spines that ran along its back. 3 creatures defeated and 3 spines broken. The crowd was now completely silent except for the sound of Jake's breathing and his boots on the arena floor. Even Admiral Zexvan had stopped making comments about human weakness. Dr. Carter watched from the viewing platform as Jake prepared for whatever would come next. She could see that he was getting stronger and more confident with each victory. His movements were more fluid now, and his tactical thinking was faster. This was what happened when humans were pushed to their limits. They didn't break, they evolved. The 4th challenge emerged from a gate on Jake's left side. This creature looked like living electricity held together in a roughly humanoid shape. Blue sparks jumped between its fingers and its eyes glowed like miniature suns. This was an energy being that could generate electromagnetic pulses strong enough to shut down most nervous systems. The creature raised its hands and sent a bolt of electricity toward Jake that should have stopped his heart instantly. But Jake had been watching and learning from each opponent. He dove behind one of the metal barriers built into the arena floor. Just as the lightning strike hit, the electricity grounded itself in the metal. Instead of hitting Jake, he had used basic physics to protect himself from an attack that had killed dozens of previous challengers. The energy creature tried again, but Jake was already moving to a new position behind. Different cover. Jake realized that the creature's electrical attacks were powerful, but they followed predictable paths like all lightning. They always took the easiest route to ground, and they couldn't bend around obstacles. He could use the arena's own structure as a weapon against this opponent, moving from cover to cover. Jake worked his way closer to the energy being while avoiding its attacks. When he got close enough, he grabbed a piece of metal debris from one of the earlier fights and threw it at the creature. Just as it was charging up for another electrical blast, the metal conducted the creature's own energy back into its core and caused a feedback loop that made it lose control of its form. The energy being flickered and sparked as it tried to maintain its shape, but the disruption was too much. Its central spine, which was made of crystallized electricity, overloaded and shattered like glass. 4 down. The crowd had gone from expecting Jake to die quickly to wondering if anything in the arena could actually stop him. Betting pools that had started with odds on how fast he would lose were now taking wagers on whether he could win all 7 challenges. The 5th challenge was different from the others. Instead of 1 creature, 3 gates opened at the same time and 3 identical predators entered the arena. These were pack hunters that had evolved to work as a perfect team. Their movements were synchronized through a biological connection that let them coordinate attacks with impossible precision. Jake watched the three creatures spread out to surround him. They moved like parts of the same organism, each one knowing exactly what the others would do without any visible communication. This was the kind of enemy that had defeated armies by making perfect tactical decisions as a group, but Jake had noticed something during his brief rest between challenges. The arena's designers had built different types of terrain to test various combat skills. There were high platforms, low trenches, and barriers that could break line of sight between opponents. The pack hunters were perfectly coordinated, but only when they could see each other. Jake ran toward the section of the arena with the most obstacles, and the three creatures followed him exactly as he had hoped. Their pack instincts made them try to maintain their formation, but the terrain forced them to split up around barriers and climb over obstacles at different speeds. When the biological connection between the pack hunters was broken by the barriers, they became confused. They had never learned to fight as individuals because they had never needed to. Jake used their confusion to attack them one at a time when they were separated from their pack mates. The first hunter went down when Jake caught it alone behind a wall where the others couldn't see. His knife found the weak spot at the base of its skull, and its spine snapped from the force of his strike. The second one fell when it tried to climb over a barrier, and Jake was waiting on the other side. The third pack hunter realized it was alone and tried to retreat, but Jake was faster. He had learned from watching the first two fights that these creatures had excellent reflexes, but poor individual decision-making. Without its packmates to coordinate with, it couldn't adapt to Jake's tactics. 5, 6, and 7. 3 more. Spines broken, and Jake was still getting stronger instead of weaker. Dr. Carter realized that the aliens were seeing something they had never encountered before. They were watching a human learn and adapt in real time, becoming more dangerous. With every challenge, instead of wearing down, Admiral Zexton finally spoke again, but his voice carried none of its earlier confidence. This is impossible. The human should be exhausted by now. Instead, it appears to be improving its performance with each encounter. One of his advisors leaned over to whisper in the Admiral's ear. Sir, our combat analysts are saying the human is not just surviving these challenges. It is learning from them and incorporating new tactics with each victory. This level of adaptation should not be possible in such a short time. Jake stood in the center of the arena and looked up at the viewing platforms. He could see the change in how the aliens were looking at him. The casual dismissal had been replaced by something that looked almost like fear. They were beginning to understand that they had seriously underestimated what humans could do. The arena master's voice came through the speakers again, but now it sounded uncertain. Sixth challenge will test environmental adaptation and survival. Skills. Arena atmosphere will be modified to create hostile conditions. Jake felt the air around him change as toxins were pumped in, and the temperature began to drop rapidly. This was designed to kill through environmental hazards rather than direct combat. But Jake had trained for hostile environments his entire military career. Using pieces of equipment from defeated creatures and debris scattered around the arena, Jake began building improvised protection against the toxic atmosphere and freezing temperature. His hands moved quickly as he assembled a makeshift respirator and insulation system that would keep him alive in conditions that would kill most life forms. The crowd watched in amazement as the human not only survived the hostile environment but seemed to thrive in it. He was using the challenge itself as a weapon, turning environmental hazards into tactical advantages. When the sixth challenge ended, Jake was still standing and still breathing normally. 6 challenges completed and one final test remained. But now everyone in the arena knew they were not watching a weak creature struggle to survive. They were watching a predator that got stronger with every fight. Crexter had been the undisputed champion of the Galactic Council arena for 7 years. Standing over 8 feet tall with 4 powerful arms ending in claws that could cut through battle armor, he had never faced an opponent who lived long enough to study his fighting patterns. His natural armor had turned aside plasma weapons, and his speed had overwhelmed every challenger who dared to face him. But as he watched Jake Morrison prepare for their final battle, Crexter felt something he had never experienced before in the arena: uncertainty. The human had not only survived 6 challenges that should have killed him, but had grown visibly more dangerous with each victory. His movements were more precise now, his tactical thinking faster, and there was something in his eyes that reminded Crexter of the apex predators from his own Deathworld. Jake stood in the center of the arena and looked up at his final opponent as Crexter descended from his private viewing platform. The champion's 4 arms moved with practiced grace, and his claws gleamed under the arena lights. This was clearly a creature built for combat, with every part of its body designed to kill efficiently. Dr. Carter gripped the rail of the viewing platform as she watched Jake assess his final challenge. She could see him cataloging Crexter's advantages and disadvantages, formulating multiple attack strategies, and preparing for what would be the most difficult fight of his life. But there was no fear in his posture, only the focused calm of a professional who had found worthy opposition. The arena master's voice echoed across the complex with an announcement that carried more weight than any of the previous challenges. Final combat between champion Crexter of Rigel Prime and the human specimen from Sol 3. Combat continues until one fighter is dead, unconscious, or yields. There are no other rules. Admiral Zexton leaned forward in his seat as the 2 fighters faced each other across the arena floor. The betting pools had closed not because there were no takers, but because the odds had shifted so dramatically that the casino operators couldn't calculate meaningful spreads. The human who was supposed to die in minutes had been fighting for over an hour and had improved with each encounter. Crexter spoke in the universal language that all council species understood. Human, you have fought well against lesser opponents, but I am the champion for good reason. I will make your death quick and honorable. Jake looked up at the towering alien and smiled with genuine appreciation. Crexter, I respect your record and your skill, but I didn't come here to die quickly. I came here to win. The champion's mandibles clicked together in what might have been approval. At least this opponent would provide some entertainment before the inevitable end. Crexter had studied recordings of Jake's earlier fights and had identified several weaknesses he could exploit. The human was clever, but cleverness meant nothing against overwhelming physical superiority. The starting signal echoed through the arena, and Crexter opened with his signature attack. All 4 arms struck simultaneously from different angles in a pattern designed to overwhelm any opponent through pure speed and coordination. His claws moved faster than most beings could see and struck with enough force to shatter stone, but Jake wasn't there when the claws arrived. He had studied recordings of Crexter's previous fights during the rest period between challenges and had noticed that the champion always opened with the same combination. Jake had used those precious minutes to plan his counter-strategy. The human's dodge was perfectly timed, and he used Crexter's own attack momentum to position himself behind the champion where the 4-armed assault couldn't reach him. Jake's combat knife struck at the joint between armor plates that no previous opponent had been fast enough to target. Crexter roared in surprise and pain as Jake's blade found gaps in natural armor that the champion hadn't even known were vulnerable. The human was using precision over power, speed over strength, and tactical knowledge over brute force. This was not how combat was supposed to work. The champion spun around with a backhand strike that should have crushed Jake against the arena wall, but the human was already moving again. He flowed around Crexter's attacks like water, never trying to match the champion's strength but always finding ways to avoid it, while delivering precise counter-strikes. For the first time in 7 years, Crexter found himself being pushed back by an opponent. Every attack he made was anticipated and countered. Every advantage he tried to press was turned against him through tactics he had never encountered. The human fought like he could read Crexter's mind and predict every move before it happened. The crowd watched in complete silence as their unbeatable champion struggled against an opponent 1/3 his size. This wasn't just combat anymore, it was a demonstration of fighting philosophy. Crexter represented raw power and natural advantages, while Jake embodied adaptation and tactical thinking. Dr. Carter realized she was holding her breath as she watched Jake systematically neutralize every one of Crexter's advantages. The human moved with a fluidity that seemed impossible, striking precisely at weak points and retreating before the champion could bring his superior strength to bear. Every movement served multiple purposes, and every defense created opportunities for offense. Crexter began to understand that he was facing something completely outside his experience. The human didn't fight like any creature he had ever encountered. There was no wasted motion, no emotional reactions, and no predictable patterns. Jake adapted to every new situation faster than Crexter could change his tactics. The champion tried using his superior reach to keep Jake at a distance, but the human used the arena's obstacles to close the gap. When Crexter attempted to use his forearms to create an impenetrable defense, Jake found angles of attack that the champion couldn't cover. Every advantage that had made Crexter unbeatable for 7 years was being systematically dismantled. Growing frustrated with his inability to land a decisive blow, Crexter made the mistake that Jake had been waiting for. The champion overcommitted to a killing strike that left him momentarily vulnerable as all 4 arms extended in a coordinated thrust designed to impale his opponent. Jake's response was immediate and devastating. He had been studying Crexter's balance and movement patterns throughout the fight and knew exactly how the champion would react to different situations. Using physics, anatomy knowledge, and perfect timing, Jake executed a maneuver that combined leverage with momentum. Instead of trying to block or dodge the four-armed attack, Jake moved inside Crexter's reach and grabbed onto the champion's extended arms. Using Crexter's own forward momentum and the principles of leverage, Jake twisted his body and threw the 8-foot champion over his shoulder in a move that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Crexter hit the reinforced arena floor with enough force to crack the metal surface. The impact drove the air from his lungs and sent shock waves through his nervous system. But more importantly, the angle of the throw and the way he landed put tremendous stress on his spine at its weakest point. The sound of Crexter's spine breaking echoed through the silent arena like a gunshot. The champion's body went limp as the spinal injury cut the connection between his brain and his limbs. For a moment, the only sound in the entire complex was Jake's controlled breathing. As he stood over his fallen opponent, 7 challenges completed, 7 spines broken, and the human was still standing. Admiral Zexthan stared down at the arena floor where the impossible had just happened. Their unbeatable champion had been defeated by a creature they had dismissed as weak and primitive. The implications of what they had witnessed would change everything about how the galaxy viewed humanity. Jake knelt beside Crexter and checked the champion's vital signs before signaling for medical assistance. Even in victory, the human showed the compassion and honor that defined the best warriors. He had fought to win, not to kill, and now he was ensuring his defeated opponent received proper care. The arena remained silent for nearly a minute, as everyone tried to process what they had seen. Then slowly, a sound began to build from the crowd. It wasn't cheering or celebration, but something deeper and more respectful. It was the sound of beings acknowledging that they had witnessed something that would be remembered for generations. The galaxy had just learned that humans were not the weak creatures they appeared to be. They were something far more dangerous. They were survivors who turned every challenge into a lesson and every defeat into victory, and they had only sent one representative to show what their species could do. The arena medical team worked quickly to stabilize Crexter while Jake stood nearby, ready to help if needed. The champion's injuries were serious but not fatal, and the advanced medical technology of the Galactic Council would ensure his full recovery. Jake had fought to prove human capability, not to take lives, and his actions after victory showed the honor that defined Earth's finest warriors. Dr. Carter felt tears streaming down her face as she watched Jake help the medical team lift Crexter onto a floating stretcher. Even after the most brutal combat trial in Council history, the human showed compassion for his fallen opponent. This was what made humanity special, not just their ability to fight and win, but their refusal to lose. Their dignity in victory. Admiral Zexton stood slowly, his worldview fundamentally changed by what he had witnessed. The casual dismissal of human capability had been replaced by something approaching awe. Around him, representatives from 17 star systems were frantically updating their reports to their home governments, knowing that every strategic assessment of Earth would need complete revision. Jake was escorted to the main observation platform where he faced a battery of questions from xenobiologists, military strategists, and diplomatic officials who were struggling to understand what they had just seen. His simple military uniform and basic equipment seemed impossible when compared to the advanced opponents he had systematically defeated. "Commander Morrison," Admiral Zexton began, his voice carrying none of its earlier amusement, "our preliminary assessment suggested that humans were physically inferior to most spacefaring species. How do you explain your performance in these trials?" Jake considered his answer carefully, knowing that his words would shape how the galaxy viewed humanity for generations to come. "Admiral, with respect, your assessments focused on raw physical measurements like strength, speed, and natural armor. But those aren't the only factors that matter in survival situations. Humans evolved as persistence hunters on a world where everything was trying to kill us." He paused to let that sink in before continuing. "We learn to survive not through being the strongest or fastest, but through adaptation, tool use, tactical thinking, and the ability to turn our environment into an advantage. Every challenge you put in front of me taught me something new about combat, about physics, about the weaknesses of creatures that rely too heavily on natural advantages. Dr. Carter stepped forward to add her scientific perspective. What you witnessed wasn't just individual skill or training. Jake represents something fundamental about human evolution. We don't just adapt to survive challenges, we adapt to overcome them completely. Every obstacle makes us stronger, smarter, and more dangerous. It's why we call ourselves the Deathworld. Species. The questions continued for hours as alien scientists tried to understand the limits of human adaptability. How quickly could humans learn new combat techniques? How effectively could they function in hostile environments? What was the extent of their tactical flexibility? Each answer revealed new aspects of human capability that the galaxy had never considered. A military advisor from the hegemony asked the question that was on everyone's mind. "Commander, you were a single human facing challenges designed to test the limits of our strongest species. Are all humans capable of this level of performance?" Jake smiled and shook his head. "I'm not even close to being our best warrior. I'm just a regular soldier who volunteered for this mission. Earth has millions of people with better training, more experience, and superior skills in different areas. What you saw today was baseline human capability when we're properly motivated." The silence that followed that statement was profound. Every alien in the observation deck was trying to process the implications of what Jake had just told them. If this performance represented average human ability, what were their elite warriors capable of? Admiral Zexton's final report to the Galactic Council would be remembered as the document that changed everything. His assessment was brief but devastating in its implications. The humans said their representative wouldn't last a minute in our trials. By hour one, their Deathworlder had broken 7 spines and redefined our understanding of combat effectiveness. Recommendation: immediate full membership in the Galactic Council with priority placement on all joint military planning committees. The bureaucratic language couldn't hide the revolutionary nature of what had occurred. Humanity had announced itself to the galaxy not through diplomacy or trade negotiations, but through the simple demonstration that when everything tries to kill you, you learn to kill everything back. The species that had been dismissed as fragile and weak had become the most sought-after military consultants in known space overnight. Jake Morrison returned to Earth as more than just a hero. He returned as the herald of a new era in human-galactic relations. The transportation ship that carried him home also brought official documents granting humanity full council membership, defense contracts worth billions of credits, and requests from military advisors from dozens of different worlds, but the real changes were happening on Earth itself. Within days of Jake's victory being broadcast across human networks, recruitment centers for what became known as the Galactic Defense Corps were flooded with applications. Young humans who had grown up dreaming of space exploration now saw their chance to serve as humanity's representatives among the stars. The applications came from every corner of human society. Former military personnel who wanted to continue serving their species in a larger arena. Athletes who saw combat trials as the ultimate competition. Scientists who wanted to study alien biology firsthand. Engineers who dreamed of working with technology from across the galaxy. All of them united by the knowledge that humanity had something unique to offer the wider universe. Training facilities were established on 6 continents to prepare humans for service in alien environments. The curriculum was unlike anything in Earth's military history, combining traditional combat skills with xenobiology, alien psychology, environmental adaptation, and diplomatic protocol. Every graduate would be an ambassador as much as a warrior, representing human values while demonstrating human capabilities. Dr. Carter was appointed as the first director of xenobiological studies for the Defense Corps, tasked with developing training programs that would prepare humans for combat against species they had never encountered. Her work became the foundation for humanity's reputation as the galaxy's most adaptable fighters. The arena on the Council homeworld underwent its own transformation. Krexter's championship trophy was retired and placed in a museum, replaced by a simple plaque that read, "Never underestimate the species from the Deathworld. They don't just survive, they win." The arena itself became a training facility where alien warriors came to learn human tactical principles and adaptive combat techniques, but perhaps the most significant change was in how other species viewed conflict itself. For millennia, galactic warfare had been dominated by species that relied on natural advantages or superior technology. The humans introduced a completely different philosophy based on adaptation, tactical thinking, and the ability to turn any disadvantage into an advantage through creative problem-solving. Military academies across the galaxy began incorporating human strategic principles into their curricula. The concept of adaptive warfare became a required course of study for officers from dozens of different species. Young aliens who had grown up believing that natural strength or advanced weapons were the keys to victory now learned that the most dangerous opponent was one who could learn and adapt faster than you could change your tactics. Jake continued to serve as humanity's primary military liaison to the Council, but he was no longer alone. Within 2 years, humans were serving on defense committees, training alien forces, and developing new tactical doctrines that combined the best elements of multiple species' approaches to combat. The galaxy became a safer place not because humans were the strongest fighters, but because they were the best teachers. The economic impact was equally revolutionary. Human military contractors became the most successful firms in galactic commerce. Not because they sold superior weapons, but because they provided superior training and tactical consulting. Entire species that had been vulnerable to more aggressive neighbors found themselves protected by defense agreements that included human military advisors. Trade routes that had been plagued by pirates for centuries became safe when human tactical specialists redesigned convoy protection protocols. Conflicts that had raged for decades were resolved when human negotiators introduced adaptive diplomatic strategies that could respond to changing political situations in real time. The galaxy learned that humans brought more than just fighting ability to the table. They brought a fundamentally different way of thinking about problems that had seemed unsolvable. Where other species saw insurmountable obstacles, humans saw puzzles waiting to be solved through creativity and determination. 5 years after Jake's victory in the arena, humanity had become one of the most influential species in the Galactic Council despite being one of the newest members. Earth itself had transformed from an isolated world seeking acceptance to a crucial partner in galactic security and stability, but the most important change was in how humans